All right, good morning. This is the last session for the day, and I'm sure you guys have been anticipating it since the conference started. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Tonight is the ARN Awards program. It will be held actually in this room. The cocktails will start at about 6 o'clock, just outside the foyer, and doors will softly open at about 6:50 or so. So, to the session. This is something new that we're trying out. It was inspired by a program on ESPN called Pardon the Interruption, and where we're just basically taking some topics of discussion that are, kind of pertinent to the industry currently, and presenting sort of like a pro and con, I guess, aspect to things. So again, we're trying it out for the first time, and we'll see how it goes. So. First two people we have on the stage right here to my left is Elizabeth Jacoviak with Minneapolis-St. Paul International. And to my right is the esteemed Stephen Freerun of ICF-SHE. All right, so the first topic, as we know who we are bid prices out of control and who is at fault? We'll let Liz go first.
Ooh, okay. Well, being 2 weeks out from getting ready to put out a bid, I think that there's a really good quote that I've heard multiple times in my tenure here in this industry, which is if you've done business with one airport, you've done business with one airport. Every single airport is different. And so I can only speak to how we do things at MSP. I will say that I have a lot of sympathy for what it must be like as an operator or a prime or a small business owner to navigate this industry as a whole, because every single airport is different. Who has ultimate authority? Who's making decisions? What's the weighted value of the criteria? Where are they going to put the importance and the value of how they ultimately award? I think that we do a lot within the document itself to try to temper cost. Every RFP is different, but it's a process to read that information, and it needs to be done in a thorough, concise, professional way. We spent, when we awarded phase one, we spent the summer reading through 6,500 pages of proposals. And in order for us to effectively do that, to retain information and to pragmatically be able to score those proposals against each other, there needed to be a level of commitment and dedication and professionalism in order for us to be able to succeed at that process. I don't know if the actual submission itself is where the cost is. I would assume that a lot of the cost is going into the development.
So it's not driven by the airport, per se. You guys set the rules, the standards, however the operators go, it's up to them. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I think it's done by the competitive nature for which people are trying to make the right impression. We had some very, very creative submissions. And it's hard to say that does not, I'm talking about the packaging, like, things showing up in a very ornate, intricate, beautiful way. At the end of the day, that was really fun and festive, and it did give you a sense of quality and commitment that an operator would put into the program, but I don't think it's a deciding factor. And so I really think it comes down to the airport and having a discussion with them about where to put the money. But I do think it's the competitive nature of the industry competing against each other that is driving up that cost. And lobbyists.
Lobbyists. No lobbyists in the room, right? Stephen?
Okay. I agree with you. There is a competitive aspect to the proposal development process, and the very nature of proponents responding is going to result in them putting their best foot forward. But you said something that really jumped off the page for me, and that was that you read 6,500 pages. So I have some specific thoughts about how to reduce the proposal requirements and still allow airports to A, save costs in the process, and B, differentiate between a good and a great proposal, because that's what's absolutely key. All airports are going to get fantastic proposals, but you have to differentiate between fantastic and absolutely outstanding, because the variation between the two are narrow. So some thoughts about that. the 6,500 pages. There's a big debate about how many pages, should there be page limits? And you can imagine that since there are so many proposals that proponents are responding to, that they have somewhat of a, I don't want to say canned or off the shelf, but there's a baseline from which they start in their proposal writing process. And asking for them to take that standard that they have and trimming it back to a minimum amount of pages is sometimes more difficult. And even though it reduces the number of pages you ultimately read, it's sometimes more difficult to say, to take that off the shelf beginning and trim that back. Number of copies is a huge factor for everybody, right? We have financial proposals, we have qualitative proposals, we have 12 copies in 3-ring binders ultimately based on the huge submittal requirements that are often required. So thinking about a digital submittal, setting up an FTP site that allows the digital submittal of a response could be a way to save costs and also allows the proponents an extra 2 or 3 days for delivery purposes to get the proposal to an airport.
There aren't any airports that are doing that now, maybe just in pockets, if it's not a
I'm
industry standard.
seeing it outside, and anybody can chime in, I'm seeing it outside of concessionaire responses. So we as a commercial consultant have often responded to proposals that allow for a digital response. But the airport has to have the FTP site capacity to handle that kind of volume.
Now you have a second page. Go ahead.
I do have a second page, but I'll be quiet and let you
No,
ask
go
another
ahead.
question. No.
Sorry.
So I'm sure it'll apply to whatever you ask next.
Sure. I mean, so Liz, is there a way to streamline the process to make it more affordable, but also just simplify things?
I think that we would do what we can, and we would all have the best interest of everybody participating in the process in mind and at heart. And I would love to be green, and I would love to say, yep, a digital submission is going to get it done for me. But I'm also going to think back to when I was reviewing those 6,500 pages, and I've got a full-time job during the day, and I've got 9 hours of meetings. I was reading those every single night, put the kids to bed at 9:30, and I stayed up with a bottle of wine, and I read
Shocker.
documents until 2 in the morning. And I needed to tangibly be able to lay them out in front of me and break it down by batch. Okay, here's the 7 proposers. I'm turning to this page and I'm looking at them across. I'm laying them out across the kitchen table. And that was really, really helpful and critical for me to be able to make decisions as to how I was going to put forth my score. It's just not realistic to say that I could do that on a computer screen.
So if that's not a way that's satisfactory to airports, there are other things like the field work and the community outreach that's required of the respondents in order to say that space A is going to be food, it's going to be quick serve, it's going to be local burger, and then here's a depth chart. If they could provide those depth charts instead of saying exactly what brand will be in that space, that could save them. So it gives you a representative example of what they're thinking for a space. That could save them the costs associated with the field work and the community outreach. And the request for drawings. A concessionaire was telling me earlier that they often spend about $25,000 to $40,000 per space in submitting eyewash drawings and so on. If there is a way to convey what the design intent is, either through a standard that already exists or representative photos, that may also potentially save costs.
So, but is that a result of maybe addendums or changes to the concept that then the operator would have to go and have those renderings redone, or is it just because we are guessing what?
Ultimately, they would have them done if they won and during the schematic design phase. But to ask them to do an eyewash drawing in the proposal development process, which some airports do, is a huge expense and often a big contributor to the total costs.
I would agree with you on that, and
I'll let you
that's
finish
not
off.
the approach that we take. However, renderings are really, drop the mic.
Drop the mic.
Well, I was shocked when she said she agreed with me, so.
Renderings are an incredibly impactful way to, without words obviously, tell us just how legit you are in being able to deliver and execute the type of vision that the airport wants. And as things grow and develop and become so much more than they ever were before, you've got to have edge. And I can't tell what that edge is unless I can physically see it. Because frankly, when you're reading those proposals, if someone's putting forth a professional foot, they're going to read quite similar in terms of verbiage. Everyone's going to tell you that they're the best, that they're going to do it this way, and this is why this brand's going to drive the most revenue in that space. But I, as a scoring member of the review team, I know how we put those unit descriptions together, have a vision for what it is we're trying to achieve, and I can align that with a physical image.
Cool. All right. Well, we're not here to solve the world's problems today, but just at least start the conversation, and I appreciate you guys sharing your thoughts. Thank you. So the next folks I'd like to introduce will be Stan Sinkowski of Premier Hospitality and Miss Lori Noyes of Tampa International. Careful, Stan. All right. And this is going to be a nice one because Stan feels very passionate about it. Has the focus on local branding gotten out of hand? Lori, you'll go first. Local brands, national brands, is that way out of control on either side?
I would say no. Local brands, the airport in every community is a community asset. And we take it very seriously as a responsibility to reflect our local community. Tampa's going through a complete redevelopment, and one of the reasons is because we didn't reflect our local community very well. And so local brands have a role in the airport, a very significant role in the airport that started about a decade ago. The opportunity in the airport is life-changing. And when you reach out to those local brands and you hear their experiences when they've come into the airport, we're changing the community. And as a community asset, we take that responsibility very seriously. And I think you'll continue to see the local movement throughout airports and more focus on local.
Stan?
Well, I certainly feel there's a place for local brands, and I've been involved with bringing a lot of local brands into the airport. I also feel the key word here is there could be too much emphasis on local brands at the expense of some of the national brands. A gentleman spoke yesterday about the different types of travelers, the dasher, the carefree, A to B, and the vacation traveler. There's some people that are not looking for an experience in an airport. They're looking for fast, efficient service. A lot of the local brands, and again, I think it's they don't have the support and the systems to give the speed of service that you need to get the economics out of every space, the sales per square foot. Back in the day, I did a big analysis on saving 10-second service time, and some of the larger brands, and I think Chick-fil-A is a perfect example of this, they know how to provide excellent food with quick speed of service. If you can serve customers in 20 seconds as opposed to 30 seconds. In our venue, the average check in a quick service restaurant is about $8. So now, and you have, say, 5 peak hours a day, you can serve one more customer a minute times 60 minutes, okay, times an $8 check average, $2,400 times 5 hours. You add that up, it's about $650,000 in sales in a quick service restaurant. So I think there's place for both. I think what you get with the national brands is you get a support system that understands speed of service and looking at speed of service in 10-second increments.
But isn't that, though, more not so much as efficiency as maybe a function of familiarity? So I know McDonald's does have their efficiencies and their systems already in place, but if it's familiarity that they have to overcome, I'm sure when you bring a local brand into an airport, they already know it has to be faster, it has to be quicker, whatever, correct?
Well, that's the marriage of a concessionaire and a local brand, right? So when an airport looks at bringing in local brands, many times we look for the expertise of a great concessionaire. And so I think that that's the other side of the coin is that you're looking to the concessionaire to help them develop those systems, to help them build those systems so that we can continue to reflect the local community, be that sense of place and what people remember and what they want to go out and see on the street when they get to their vacation or their business spot. And so it's very important that you have that relationship.
Stan?
No, I agree, and you said the familiarity and also the systems. Again, if you're going to bring local brands into the airport, and we've brought some into Laurie's airport, I think it's important that you do it right, that you meet with those local brands, you explain to them what it's going to take to operate in the airport. The economic model in the airport is a lot different. The only thing the local brands see is the sales. They see the people in the airport and the sales coming in. What they don't understand is the economic model is different. A brand on the street runs about a 12% cash flow margin. Well, you take that brand, you bring them in the airport, you immediately tack 10% onto their occupancy cost. On the street, a brand operates total occupancy cost, rent, taxes, CAM, insurance, 9%. You bring them in the airport, you're going to tack close to 10%, sometimes more, onto that. You're going to tack another 2% onto labor because of parking and everything that goes with it. You've got to understand you've got to make up some efficiencies and you've got to get them, you've got to operate that brand correctly to be successful with that in the airport, whether the brand operator himself operates or someone else operates that brand. So I think local brands, it's important to bring them in. We do it right.
So is there a ratio, or is there, I mean, not a standard across the board, but a perfect ratio that you could say, 30-70 local to national kind of thing, would you say?
I think it depends on the mix of your program and the size of your spaces. I don't think there's any perfect mix. I think our perfect mix would be a 60-40 split, just based on the layout of our airport.
National to local?
Local to national.
Local, national, 60-40.
Yep.
I think I agree. 60-40 split is probably right where it should be. And I think it all depends on the airlines and how those airlines are operating. Where the airlines are banking now and they're turning flights in 30, 35 minutes, speed of service becomes more important in those locations. Where you have the longer haul flights and you want to create the experience and bring some of the brands in, that's where I think you have those. And the last point I say on that is when you bring the local brands in, they should be the brand ambassador. So they should represent the brand in a positive manner. When you put pressure on the economics of the brand and you don't deliver the experience that they deliver on the street, you have problems. So I think what belongs where depends. 60-40 mix, we're in agreement. And I think, though, the types of flights that are going out of those gates plays a big role in it.
So do you think, in your experience, that if there was local brand X, and you as the operator will just say, like, you're bringing them into the airport, I'm sure, giving them the realities of the airport. The way you operate on the street is not the way here, so you reduce the size of your menu or your serving sizes, whatever it is to meet that, a 3-minute window or however it takes to serve properly. So they're already going in knowing I have to kind of compromise a little bit, correct?
Yeah, I think you've got to really educate them. We brought local brands into Tampa Airport with Laurie. I can tell you that I spent months and months and months with those brands to make sure that we had the systems that we could deliver against the promise they have on the street. And I think Laurie will agree that the representation we have of the local brands that we brought into the airport represents what they are on the street. In fact, maybe even help them on the street. I hope you agree.
I would agree with that, but I would also say, I don't want to represent local brands as being inferior to the national brands and what they can accomplish in speed of service and level, quality, and just an overall service experience. I think we've seen in many times local brands can very well compete with national brands and surpass national brands, and that's why airports continue to introduce more and more to the mix. And I think, again, with a strong prime concessionaire, that they can deliver all of those things along with a sense of place.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. All right. All right, next person up, next couple up will be Mr. Walt Froman and the Kiwi man, Mr. Richard Asen from Delaware North. Did I say that properly, Richard? You got that. All right. You're welcome. All right. So they're going to have the wonderful topic of the escalating cost of bidding. Does street pricing still make sense? Stephen, you still love this topic, right? Street pricing. So we're going to let Walt go first. It's on.
It's on. Good morning. Well, you're certainly going to notice that I'm probably not well prepared for this because we just made a switch 5 minutes before.
Thanks for telling people that, Walt.
Before we got
Still
up
can
here,
slide
so
that
I'm
through, that's
prepared
okay.
for a whole different topic, not this, but I'm going to wing it. So anyway, at PDX, we have been true street priced forever since the program was up and running. We promote and that through all of our RFPs, so the operators know the expectations, of course, and they bid with that in mind. Our sales per plane passenger are amongst the highest in the industry. We are at about $13, which is pretty high compared to others. And that is, reflective of the street pricing. We work very, very closely with our operators, most of which we're at least 70% local. And we provide them a lot of support, not only with the onboarding, but ongoing with badging issues, with a big sales promotion program. Right now we're setting up our big spring break promotion that will drive considerably a lot of incremental revenue, which helps the concessionaires a lot. We promote this throughout the airport, through our signage programs, the banners, all that type of thing. And we have found it gives great credibility to our program. The community appreciates it. We work real closely with the operators to help them. We have a tiered rent structure, so they pay a higher percentage as their business grows and develops. And overall, it has worked really, really well. We've had, some instances where there have been some issues. We've worked closely with those operators, and being that most of them, with the exception of News and Gift, are local, the pricing is the same as it's on the street as in the airport. With News and Gift operators, we agree on 3 comparable facilities, and the prices have to be within that range because they don't have a street presence, so to speak. And I think that's shooting from the hip. That's
Thanks, Walt.
about it.
That was very thorough. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramon.
So, Richard, you're counter to that. Obviously, as an operator, you feel that it's necessary because,
So, firstly, Walt, a 13 RPE is not to be sniffed at. That's a fabulous performance, and I think the description of the partnership and support of the concessionaires is encouraging. And I think there's probably 3 component parts to this. There's a question of the economics, and I don't have to do this because Stan did it for me, so thank you, Stan. I think you described perfectly that the economics on the street is different to the economics on the airport, and I think the factor you gave was about 10%. So the economics are an important consideration. The second one is revenue, because obviously we're all trying to strive for the best RPE that we can, and we share in that through the mechanism of percentage rent. So we don't want to leave money on the table. And then the other very important piece is customer satisfaction and a sense of a value proposition. So all of those things play into it. But when we look at street the pricing, if the economics are not given consideration, and so we don't get any flex with the airport, that becomes challenging. And so the return on capital is not the same, the economics become more challenging. The second thing is that we looked at at a very high level, we looked at a few airports. So we looked at Nashville, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, BWI as examples, their RPEs and also the revenue they're generating per square foot. Now that second metric is important because each program is very different, the per square feet to the enplaning passenger ratio, so it helps give some relativity. But on that, when we compared that then with Atlanta, Austin, Denver, Minneapolis as example that have Street Plus 10, we're seeing an RPE on the street at about 620, this is food only, and we're seeing an RPE of 660 Street Plus 10. but on the per square foot, we're seeing 1,082 on street and 1,377 on street plus 10. So I think, again, the intuitiveness suggests that if you strictly adhere to street, you don't give those other considerations, that in some instances at least, that we're not picking up enough in transaction to replace that drop. And I don't think that's a favourable outcome in the instances that occurs. But again, you know, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It needs to be a collaborative effort. I think what we would perhaps like to see is more the approach that the hotel industry takes. So the hotel industry look at comparables. They look at their average daily rate and they look at occupancy. And there's a direct correlation when you're pushing for rate. When you get occupancy to a certain level, you can push for rate. And when you're pushing for occupancy, your ADR, your average daily rate, comes down. So you're letting the market tell you where that needs to be, and you can flex up and flex down accordingly. And the ultimate measure then is RevPAR. Their RevPAR is our RPE, is the key metric to say, well, I got that correlation between, in our world, number of transactions and pricing. So look, I don't think it's a simple thing, but in the instance where we have an airport that says, I want to impose street, I want you to work under the same economic conditions that are unfavourable to the street, I don't think that's a good outcome.
So you're saying you want to follow the hotel model?
I would prefer to do that. Now, again, part of this is to how well we can administer that program. And this is not if it's street plus 10, it's not 10% across the board. There are products that are far more sensitive to price, water, for example, coffee, items that we consume regularly and we have a sense of price, as opposed to a plated meal or a more premium product, or in your programming that you might be bringing in the gourmet burger as examples. So, you know, I think the administration of the program is an important consideration as well.
Well, that explains my $10 chapstick in the hotel gift shop, I guess.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. But so Walt, then, should we really start thinking about the customer first? I mean, what is the purpose of street pricing for the customer rather than, we'll set Richard aside for now, why you push for street pricing?
It's a total win for the customer. They are paying the same price at the airport as they pay on the street at the same facility. You can buy a bottle of water at Portland for $1.50 as opposed to $9.95, $5.95, whatever it is. And the passenger recognizes that and they spend more. I can't tell you enough. When I walk through the airport and people, you know, they expect to get gouged, so to speak, and they're $1.50, they're just remark about that, and we get such wonderful passenger input and satisfaction with the program, and a lot of that ties directly back to the street pricing.
So, Richard, should the customer just expect to obviously pay a premium because you're in a hotel or you're in an airport? And you just understand,
I don't think so. I think that the sensitivity to price gouging, absolutely, Walt. I agree that's something we have to avoid. In any instance, there has to be the value proposition for anything that you're then ultimately going to purchase. And if that's not there, then the purchase won't occur. But I think, again, as I said earlier, it's not just a one-size-fits-all. And in the instance where you can run a program like you have run and give those other considerations, and your RPE is suggesting that you are getting the right outcomes, well then I think the concessionaires would absolutely be in favour of that. But in the instance where those economics remain the same, as Stan is saying, there was a 10% increment on cost, street versus being in a non-traditional environment, and in the instance where we see that the program is not well administered and therefore we're not getting the RPE we want to go, I think they're the things that we want to look at. But I do think, and I would encourage, I do think that there's a more flexible and perhaps sophisticated way we should be looking at our pricing strategies on airports, period. And I don't know if that's just street or street plus. I think it is really trying to understand where we're getting that optimum mix of programming and mix of product and experience, dealing with the various day parts, et cetera, getting the right customer satisfaction, as we've said, and pricing plays an integral part in that.
Are you in any airports that feature street pricing?
Yes.
Which ones? I'm just curious.
We're in Nashville, for example.
Nashville,
which is
example.
right, yeah.
So will that deter you from bidding on any other airports that will,
Not at all. I mean, at the end of the day, it's
Good answer.
it's just math, right?
Yes.
So the economics either make sense or they don't make sense. I think again, the intuitive nature is that straight street pricing in some instances, I think, leaves money on the table. That doesn't mean we have to price gouge. And that money is shared between the concessionaire to get their return on investment, and as importantly, with the airport. And non-aeronautical revenues to you are critically important to do the things that you want to be able to do. So I would just want to make sure that from a pricing strategy perspective, we're optimizing that RPT to get to the best RPE we can.
All right, thank you. Thank you
We
very much.
additionally take in consideration, total occupancy expenses. So there is some give and take there also to help the concessionaire be successful. Because the last thing we want to do is, put someone out of business or underperform because of a pricing structure.
Thank you guys very much. All right, moving along, I would like to invite Ms. Lise DeAndrea from Customer Service Experts and Mr. Jeff Livney from Grab Mobile. You gonna be okay, Jeff?
I'm fine.
All right. All right. I guess Lise wanted all you guys to argue a lot more than we're arguing right now.
Hi,
Well, you
everyone.
guys can certainly, this would be a memorable end to the session if you guys want to start duking it out. So the topic that we're covering today, has self-service gone too far? So Lise, your company's built on, I guess instituting customer service training for airports and operators and such. Do you feel that the self-service with the apps, the tablets, the machines, and kiosks and things like that has just gone too far?
I don't think it's gone too far. I think we've just gotten a little ahead of ourselves, and I think we've underestimated the ability for the adoption of technology across all of the demographics in different airports. We work every day, day in and day out, with all different types of passenger-facing employees in the airport. The level of anxiety and stress on them and the level of anxiety and stress on customers is a really important consideration when we're talking about throwing in a level of technology that people are unfamiliar with. And I think that raises that whole level of passenger angst. So I don't think it's gone too far. I think we're on the right track, and I think it's definitely headed in the right direction. We're seeing that demonstrated by the airlines, who have done this quite successfully with check-in and sometimes baggage now. We're seeing that self-serve is really becoming, it's adopted easily. It's passengers are familiar with it. But the one thing that I think is my key torch that I want to hold today is having personal support to that technology and making sure that there's a backup plan. Because if you have technology standing in front of you and no one there to help you with it if something goes wrong, I think the passenger confidence greatly will reduce, and their trust in the technology is greatly reduced. So it's important as you go into early adoption to make sure that there is someone there to support you and help you. And I think that's where it gets too far, when we start to put too many pieces of technology into place and not have someone there to help you when something goes wrong.
Cool. Well, Jeff, you have an app that lets you order ahead. I've used it many times when I'm going from Atlanta, from CETA to, here's a plug, Richard, to the Food Network kitchen and to pick up something to eat, and it's waiting for me. So I really have zero interaction with anybody at all. It's there, ready for me. I just grab it and go. So is the app that you guys have created, is that really just a function of eliminating some labor or eliminating, I guess, that connection that the consumer could have possibly with the brand?
Well, I think there's a blend between the technology and the hospitality. So, I think we actually, this is less spirit of a debate than I thought, because I agree with you on a lot of things. There's the right blend to it, and I think sometimes some implementations, the technology can go too far in some cases. If I sit down at a restaurant and I order a $40 steak, maybe I don't want to order that on a tablet and have no human around to offer a wine pairing, as an example. But in most concepts, when you have all these macro trends happening in the airport, you have tighter banks, You have, customers that don't have time to wait in line because of that, rising operation costs, labor, and everything that's going on in the market, and, street pricing like we just talked about. I think there's, certainly a use of, this sort of speed of service technology, and whether it's mobile or whether it's kiosk. Now, at times, can it go too far? I think, everyone's trying different things. You have to figure out what's right for all audiences. Not every audience is going to download a mobile app and use that in the airport. They're not always going to use a kiosk as well. But when you can start to funnel most of your transactions for those that are already using self-service outside the airport, we're checking in on our phone, we're not going to the counters anymore, we're ordering on our phone for all sorts of locations outside of the airport, we're doing business on our own device, then you need to be able to support that. And so I think that, obviously generationally it's going to change over time, but we can't look at it and say, is technology the future here? It's really the now. We just have to make sure that we support it properly and have that experience. And so, what we do is, it's not about replacing the human capital with technology, it's helping them be more efficient. So, as an example, say you have a coffee shop and you have 2 registers taking orders and 2 baristas making drinks. That should really be 1 register taking orders for those that can't use technology, and then everyone else putting in orders through mobile or through kiosk, and then you now have 3 people that can make drinks. And so you're increasing your throughput, you're utilizing your space better. And I think that's really, the best implementation of it. But like as an example, when you say, you order on the app and you really don't see a human being at that point, well, I think there's a lot of implementations where you certainly can. So in a mobile environment, the restaurant can know how often you order there, what you look like, and all of these types of data, how, if you're a VIP traveler, you travel frequently. So when you come up to pick up your order, they have your photo, they can greet you by your name instead of a number. And so I think there's a lot of touch points they can utilize to make it a better experience with technology.
So it's not something, or yours is not a solution that hits all, let's just focus on food, all types of eateries, let's say. If it's something for quick serve, or like Food Network Kitchen, or maybe something else, that works. But if you're going for, and you can opt for a sit-down meal, you're not looking to replace that, unless it's really just to make sure my table's waiting, and by the time I get there, my steak is getting fired up. Is that what?
Right, yeah, I mean, as a traveler, if I have a long layover, I may not want to go grab an expensive item and then, find a place in a gatehold area to sit. There's, gatehold areas right now in most airports don't have a place. I'm eating off my lap. And so, it depends on your experience. But what we find is that, people are getting to the airport later, they have tighter connections, they're rushing to get through, and they're stressed. In most cases, with everything moving towards QSR and fast casual, that, at those locations, it makes a lot of sense. And then at the, sit-down type locations, use Chili's as an example. I may not have time to go wait in line, order, and wait 15 minutes for my food when I have a connection, but I'd rather have that than a QSR. So I think, the casual sit-downs can do well, but the higher-end options, you're still looking for that, that aspect of hospitality if you have the time in the location.
So Lisa, are you saying so the self-serve aspect it's great in some places, maybe not in others?
I think we've come to the point where it's kind of a one-size-fits-all, and I think that's where we really have to be careful. I know there are a lot of RFPs out there now that are actually requiring this and requesting this of bidders that are coming in, especially in the food service program. So it's interesting if you haven't already adopted that, and then all of a sudden you're quickly trying to ramp up and start to implement the technology without having tried it, without having piloted it, not having your employees onboarded to the technology and really understanding how to support it, we're going to get into trouble. So one other point I wanted to make was, there is that business case, and I know a lot of concessionaires are looking at this, putting on paper the business case for reducing labor costs, increasing efficiency, also on upsell, maximizing sales per transaction, making sure that we're able to do that through technology, and we are just not there yet. We haven't gotten to that point yet. Making sure that, that reduction in labor cost is really going to get you reap the same reward. I think an interesting example was on the elevators. Who's been frustrated with the elevators here at the hotel? Anybody have trouble with the elevator, the high-tech elevator? Okay, so the business case on that was, what was the investment in that new technology? I can't even imagine. I wouldn't even want to know what that might cost. But there's a young gal out there who's been manning the elevator hallway. I'm sure you've seen her. I asked her some questions the other day. I said, how long do you have to stand out here each day? She said, oh, I have a 6-hour shift, and I have to support this to make sure people know where they're going and how to use the touch pads. And then she started to share with me some of the issues that they have with all of that. So I wonder if back, in the RFP phase of when they were bidding on this new technology for the elevators, if they really took into consideration that they were going to have someone there manning this elevator situation, because I've never really seen that in a hotel. You push number 1, you go to number 1. You push number 5, you go to number 5. You don't need a person there to help you. So my point is making sure that when we're looking at this, that we do really understand fully what the labor costs are going to be. They're not going to go away. We certainly should have some form of support and employee assistance so that we can help our adopters who take a longer time to work on that technology and understand it, and not just leave them, hanging out in the cold and standing in front of a tablet trying to figure out. I think going back to the 10-second transaction too, are we ever going to get to a 10-second per transaction pace? Are we going to have that kind of speed of service if we're working with this type of technology? I think that raises a really interesting business case question. What revenue are we losing by adopting this technology is just another question too.
Well, and I think that example, is a little different, right? So a 10-second transaction, a POS counter, the person's already at the front. They know what they want from above. And when you get it done in 10 seconds, you mentioned upselling. E-commerce in general shows a higher transaction size than any sort of human at a counter. If you can upsell, you can feature promotions, you can really target to the user in an e-commerce environment, whether it's on your phone or on a kiosk, you're going to see a higher average transaction. And when you look at 10 seconds per POS transaction, that's really transactional. But say you replace one POS register with 3 self-service kiosks and mobile ordering, then it's a totally different experience. It's not about necessarily getting someone through in 10 seconds. If in 13 seconds I can increase their ticket size and we have enough kiosks to support it. So I think it's a little bit different. If e-commerce is showing higher upselling and higher ticket sizes than a regular transaction, then the situation should be how can we utilize the space best from a flow standpoint and with customer traffic so that we can get more customers engaged in the product. Because when you walk up to a counter at a typical restaurant and you have a POS, you have line pressure behind you, there's 7 people in line, you're going to spit out your order. The person behind the counter is not incented to upsell you. And so, yes, it may be super fast, but it's also not increasing the spend of the passenger in that case. Mm-hmm. Whereas when everyone has e-commerce, and I can see that Lise used the mobile app in Atlanta, and then she used a different partner's app in Detroit, and then she used a self-service kiosk in LAX, and I know what you're purchasing in each place, then I'm going to be upselling and incenting what you see based on your experience, what you're most inclined to purchase. Mm-hmm. And so it can be fast over time once the adoption's there. You can see, products that you see different than other people from a featured standpoint once we get to know who you are. And in an e-commerce environment, in one click, you can order on a mobile app. If you have your favorites every time, one click, your payment's there. It's much faster than a regular transaction at the register anyways.
So it basically knows, what Jeff is saying, he knows that you ordered that number 5 at McDonald's at BWI before you left.
How'd you know that?
So is there going to be, I guess, an application on the retail, let's say just newsstands and travel convenience, where there isn't much of a need for human interaction, maybe for upselling? Because I know I want a magazine or a candy bar, whatever it is, immediately. Now that's a lot of SKUs to put on an app, but would you ever have or have you integrated something like that?
Yeah, well, we're working on retail right now. I think it's really interesting, and we'll find out, what different types make the most sense. I think you're right. News and gifts is very transactional focused. It can make a lot of sense. There's a lot of SKUs, though. So that's something interesting to look at. When you get into specialty retail and duty free, I think there's a significant opportunity available there from a customer standpoint. You can really speed up the service there. If say we're embedded in an airline app, we've partnered with the airline, we can pull in your itinerary automatically, we know your passport information, we can skip all of the dock checks, make it very easy to order from a duty-free location. And say you look, and our U.S. airports are not necessarily designed the same as ones overseas where you're forced to go through a large duty-free operation. And so say you're not walking by the duty-free location, didn't know it was there, and you're connecting through an international market, then it gives you an opportunity to digital can really break down those barriers because all of a sudden it's a level playing field. The physical space and the layout becomes a little less important.
So I was traveling out of a airport in the Washington area, I won't name it, and I was traveling internationally, and I was walking through, and there's two walls of retail merchandise, tons of SKUs, many, many SKUs, and I think one kiosk where you could check out, and no employee in sight, and there were probably $85, $90 Redskins caps stacked in piles. There were bottles of water, all different types of things. I needed a bottle of water. I needed a couple of other items, and I walked up to the kiosk, and I couldn't get anything to scan, and I couldn't find anyone. And I felt like I was getting ready to get on a plane. I could have put anything in my bag and boarded the flight and been fine. Nothing was censored. So how do we deal with loss prevention in the retail scenario? I mean, we've been talking largely about food and beverage. In the retail scenario, how does self-service play in with that?
Well, and I think there's a lot of advancements in technology there. I don't know anyone today that's saying completely unattended retail is the solution. I think that there's a way that you can increase the throughput with an attended retail solution. So if customers are using retail, it should really be more about attendants that are helping customers use the technology. There's a curve that they need to adapt to. So I don't know why there wasn't, an employee around. That's something to look into. But there should be someone there to help guide customers through whatever the technology experience is. But look at like supermarkets and self-checkout. You've got 10 self-checkout stands. There's usually an attendant to help when there's an issue. And until we get to the point that the technology supports that everyone knows how to use it and it's always working, there needs to be a solution for that. But I think there's also a lot of technology that can help. So there's companies out there, they're putting in cameras to monitor security wait times. They're watching people. You can tie that into beacons and RFID technology, and so you can start to see when high-ticket items are walking out of the location. So I don't think loss prevention isn't so worried about the pack of gun leaving all the time, but an $80 jersey is certainly a bigger issue. And so there's technology to certainly look at that. So if you have an attendant there, they can see oh, someone's walking away with a high-ticket item. That's where they are on a map. You can see the dot of the customer walking with that item.
Right. So back to the business case, those are considerations in terms of what this is all really going to cost. We may be reducing our labor, but we're increasing our security monitoring.
So you're moving costs around, basically.
We're moving costs around, but really looking at the total, bottom line cost, because it is, I think, we've gone a little bit beyond ourselves in really understanding that until we implement, and then we're like, oh, now we need a security camera.
Yeah, well, and I think, that's what airports are doing too, right? They're embracing technology on an airport-wide level, and so, at some point it's like a Wi-Fi network. Services like that should be a service to all of the concessions and all of the operators in an airport, and there's some airports that are moving in that direction. But if you also look at it, if you can increase your throughput, then, you've got a lot more transactions in that sense. So the technology should be there to support the increase in throughput, to support the marketing aspect of the program, and then over time the technology, when everyone shares it, can certainly go down as well. I don't think you wouldn't expect like an individual kiosk operator to go out there and install cameras themselves. The airport wouldn't let them anyways. But it's something that as everyone moves to this digital environment and everyone's using the same digital tools, then they're there to support the program as a whole.
All right. Well, thank you very much, guys, and all the presenters for presenting. Hope you guys got a lot of it. And there's a breakdown in the Elite Hall if you could find your way down there and navigate the elevators again. And then lunch will be served afterwards. So thank you very much, and we'll see you tonight at the awards dinner. Thank you.